Maya Rodriguez pressed her face against the cold metal window of the space station. She watched the patrol ships return from their daily missions, their engines glowing blue in the darkness of space. The other human officers walked past her in the hallway, but nobody stopped to talk. They never did. At 26 years old, Maya was the youngest alien expert ever sent to work at Defense Station Meridian. The station floated at the edge of human space, where dangerous creatures from other worlds sometimes appeared. Most people thought this was an honor. Maya knew better. Her fellow officers saw her as a problem they did not want to deal with. "Look, it's the bug lover," said Commander Jake Sullivan as he walked by with 3 other officers. They all wore the same dark blue uniforms, but theirs had combat medals pinned to their chests. Maya's uniform was plain. "Still trying to make friends with monsters instead of killing them," the other officers laughed. Maya kept looking out the window and said nothing. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. Commander Sullivan was popular with the crew. He had led successful missions against hostile alien species in 4 different star systems. When he spoke, people listened. Maya's job was different. While the other officers trained for battle, she studied alien languages and behaviors. She spent her days in a small lab, reading reports about strange creatures and trying to understand how they thought. The military leaders who sent her here believed this knowledge could be useful. The officers who worked with her every day thought it was a waste of time. The truth was that Maya loved her work. Each alien species was like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She had learned to speak 7 different alien languages and could recognize the warning signs of aggression in 12 different species. But her excitement about these discoveries only made her colleagues more suspicious of her. "Rodriguez is too soft," she had overheard Commander Sullivan telling Captain Lisa Monroe last week. "We need fighters out here, not scientists who think. Every alien wants to be our friend." Maya understood their concern. The frontier was dangerous. 3 months ago, a mining colony in the next system had been attacked by something the survivors called shadow creatures. Everyone in the colony had died except for 2 people who managed to escape in a damaged ship. The attackers had left. No traces behind except claw marks on metal walls, but Maya believed that understanding these creatures was the key to surviving encounters with them. Fear made people do stupid things. Knowledge gave them better options. The station's computer system announced an incoming message from Alliance Command. Captain Monroe's voice echoed through the hallways, calling all senior staff to the main meeting room. Maya sighed and left her spot by the window. As a department head, she was required to attend these briefings. Even though she rarely contributed to the discussions, the meeting room was large and circular, with a massive screen dominating one wall. Captain Monroe stood at the center, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was a fair leader who treated Maya with respect, but she also had to manage the opinions of her other officers. Maya took her usual seat at the back of the room. The combat officers filled the front rows, their conversation loud and confident. Commander Sullivan sat in the front, his broad shoulders and scarred hands making him look like exactly what he was, a professional soldier. "Quiet down, everyone," Captain Monroe said. The room fell silent. "We have received important intelligence from Alliance Command about a new threat in our sector." The main screen lit up with a star map showing their region of space. A red zone appeared 3 systems away from their current position. "Intelligence reports indicate that the Shadowclaw pack has been spotted in the Kepler system," Captain Monroe continued. "For those who are not familiar with this species, the Shadowclaws are considered one of the most dangerous predators in known space." Maya's heart began to beat faster. She had studied every report about the Shadowclaw species, though the information was limited. They were described as 8-foot-tall creatures with reptilian skin and razor-sharp claws. They moved faster than most species and hunted in coordinated groups. But what made them truly terrifying was that they had never been successfully contacted by any Alliance species. "Every recorded encounter with the Shadowclaws has ended in violence," Captain Monroe explained. "They appear to be highly intelligent, but they have shown no interest in communication. Their attack patterns suggest advanced tactical thinking, but they have never responded to any attempts at peaceful contact. The screen changed to show grainy images captured by long-range sensors. The creatures in the photos looked exactly as the reports described: tall, powerful, and undeniably dangerous. But something about their movements caught Maya's attention. The way they positioned themselves relative to each other suggested complex social structures. "Captain," Commander Sullivan said, raising his hand, "are we expecting them to come here?" "It's possible," Captain Monroe replied. "The Shadow Claws are nomadic. They travel from system to system, and their current trajectory could bring them to our location within the next few days." Worried murmurs filled the room. Maya understood their concern. The station's defenses were designed to handle pirates and small raiding parties, not apex predators with unknown capabilities. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Captain Monroe said, turning to look at her, "I want you to review all available data on the Shadow Claw species. If they do arrive here, we need to know whether communication is possible before we resort to weapons." The room erupted in protests. Commander Sullivan stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Captain, with all due respect, this is not the time for Rodriguez's theories about making friends with aliens. The Shadow Claws are killers. We should be preparing our defenses and calling for military reinforcements, not planning diplomatic meetings." Other officers voiced their agreement. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as laughter rippled through the room. She had heard these arguments before, but they still stung. "The lieutenant's approach might work with some species," said Lieutenant Pete Williams from the Communications Department. "But these creatures have killed hundreds of people. They don't want to talk." Maya wanted to defend herself, but she knew that speaking up would only make things worse. The other officers had already made up their minds about her methods. They saw her attempts at understanding alien behavior as weakness, not strength. "Captain." Monroe raised her hand for silence. "I understand your concerns, but we need to explore all options. If the Shadow Claws arrive here, we will be outnumbered and outgunned. Our only advantage might be superior intelligence and planning." "Then let's focus on tactical intelligence," Commander Sullivan argued. "Weapon capabilities, ship designs, attack patterns, not alien psychology." Maya finally found her voice. "Commander, understanding their psychology is part of tactical intelligence. If we know how they think, we can predict their actions." Sullivan turned to face her, his expression skeptical. "Rodriguez, you have been studying these creatures for months. What have you learned that would help us in a fight?" Maya took a deep breath. This was her chance to prove that her work had value. The attack patterns in previous encounters show signs of restraint. They could have caused much more damage than they did, but they seem to focus on specific targets. And their group movements suggest they have complex communication systems. "Restraint?" Sullivan laughed. "They wiped out entire colonies, but they left some survivors," Maya pointed out. "And they didn't destroy the infrastructure. It's like they were sending a message rather than just killing for the sake of killing." The room fell quiet. Maya could see that some officers were thinking about her words, but others looked unconvinced. Captain Monroe made her decision. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you have 48 hours to prepare a full analysis. Commander Sullivan, I want you to coordinate our defensive preparations. If the Shadow Claws arrive, we need to be ready for any situation." As the meeting ended, Maya gathered her notes and headed for the door. She could hear the other officers talking quietly among themselves, and she knew they were discussing her. Some probably thought she was naive. Others might think she was dangerous, but Maya believed that understanding was always better than ignorance, especially when lives were at stake. She had 2 days to prove that her approach could work. If she failed, people would die, and her career would be over. If she succeeded, she might just save everyone on the station. Maya spent the next 2 days buried in her research. She reviewed every report about the Shadow Claw species, studying attack patterns and survivor testimonies. Her small lab became cluttered with data screens and printed documents. She barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. The information was frustrating. Most reports came from military encounters that ended quickly and violently. The few civilian survivors could only describe terrifying creatures that moved like shadows and struck without warning. But Maya noticed details that others had missed. In every attack, the Shadow Claws had approached from specific directions. They avoided certain types of terrain and never attacked during particular weather conditions. Their movements showed planning and intelligence, not random violence. Maya began to suspect that these creatures followed rules that humans simply did not understand. She was working late on her second night when the station's alarm system suddenly activated. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors, and the computer's voice echoed from every speaker. Alert, unknown vessel detected approaching the station. All personnel report to battle stations immediately. Maya's heart jumped. She saved her work and ran toward the command center, joining streams of officers rushing through the hallways. The station had practiced this scenario many times, but Maya could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew this might be the real thing. The command center was chaos when she arrived. Officers sat at their stations, fingers flying over controls as they prepared the station's defenses. Captain Monroe stood in the center of the room, her voice calm but urgent as she gave orders. "Report," she called to the sensor operator. "Unknown." "Vessel bearing 27 Mark IV, the young officer replied. "Distance approximately 50,000 kilometers and closing slowly." Maya found an empty station and pulled up the sensor data. On the screen she could see a shape unlike any ship in the Alliance database. It was long and curved with organic lines that reminded her of a sea creature. The hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it difficult to get clear readings. "No response to our standard communication frequencies," reported Lieutenant Pete Williams from the communications station. "I've tried all Alliance protocols. Weapon status?" Captain Monroe asked. Commander Sullivan answered from the tactical station. "No obvious weapon ports visible, but the hull material is blocking our deep scans. It could be hiding anything." Maya studied the ship's approach pattern. The vessel was moving slowly and deliberately, following a path that brought it directly toward the station. But something about its movements seemed familiar. "Captain," she said, stepping forward, "the approach vector isn't aggressive. They're maintaining a consistent speed and trajectory. In most species, this indicates peaceful intent." Sullivan looked up from his station with annoyance. "Rodriguez, this isn't a textbook scenario. We're dealing with an unknown vessel that could be carrying weapons we can't even detect." Maya wanted to argue, but the ship's behavior was becoming clearer. It was slowing down as it approached, following what appeared to be a careful, measured pattern. She had seen similar approaches in her studies of first contact situations. "Captain," she said again, "they're following standard diplomatic spacing protocols. The distance they're maintaining, the speed reduction, the direct approach, it's all consistent with peaceful contact procedures. Or it could be a hunting strategy," Sullivan replied. "Predators often approach their prey slowly to avoid spooking them." On the main screen, the alien ship continued its approach. Maya watched as it gradually slowed and then stopped at exactly 1 kilometer from the station. The distance was perfect, close enough to demonstrate friendly intentions, far enough to show they were not trying to threaten or attack. "They've stopped," announced the sensor operator, holding position at 1,000 meters. Maya felt a surge of excitement. "Captain, that's standard diplomatic distance for first contact. They're following protocols that suggest they understand peaceful communication." But before anyone could respond, the communication station began receiving a new type of signal. Lieutenant Williams frowned at his displays, adjusting controls as he tried to interpret the incoming data. "Captain, I'm picking up some kind of transmission," he reported. "It's not using any of our standard frequencies, but there's definitely a pattern to it." Maya rushed to his station and began analyzing the signal. The pattern was complex, unlike anything in the Alliance database. It consisted of electromagnetic pulses that seemed to follow mathematical sequences. But there was something else. The rhythm and timing reminded her of biological processes. "It's language," she said, her excitement growing. "Not like any language?" "We know, but there's definitely structure here. Mathematical progressions, repeating elements, pattern variations that suggest grammar." Commander Sullivan stood up from his station. "Rodriguez, you can't possibly know that from looking at random signals." "It's not random," Maya insisted. "Look at these sequences. They start simple and become more complex, like someone is trying to establish a baseline for communication. And here, these patterns repeat but with small variations. That's how language works." Captain Monroe moved to stand beside them. "Lieutenant, are you certain this is an attempt at communication?" Maya studied the patterns more carefully. The mathematical sequences were elegant and purposeful. The signal strength varied in ways that suggested emphasis and tone. Everything about it indicated intelligence and intent. "Yes, Captain. I'm certain. This is a greeting." Suddenly the transmission stopped. The command center fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant vibration of the station's engines. Everyone watched the main screen, waiting to see what would happen next. On the display, they could see the alien ship floating motionless in space. Then, slowly, a section of the hull began to change. What had appeared to be solid metal started to iris open like a flower, revealing an opening large enough for a person to pass through. "Hull breach detected on the alien vessel," reported the sensor operator. "No, wait, it appears to be intentional. Something's coming out." Maya watched in fascination as a figure emerged from the opening. It was tall and moved with fluid grace. Despite being in the vacuum of space, the creature wore no visible spacesuit, yet it seemed completely comfortable in the airless environment. "Hostile contact confirmed," Commander Sullivan announced. "It's a shadow claw." The creature on the screen was exactly as the reports had described, 8 feet tall, covered in dark scales that seemed to shift and change color. Its limbs were long and powerful, ending in claws that gleamed even in the dim light of space. But Maya noticed something that the others missed. "Look at its posture," she said urgently. "The way it's holding its arms and claws. In predator body language, that's a non-aggressive stance." Sullivan's voice was skeptical. "Rodriguez, you're reading too much into this. It's a killing machine floating outside our station." But Maya was studying the creature's movements more carefully. It wasn't preparing to attack or showing signs of aggression. Instead, it seemed to be performing some kind of ritual. Its movements were deliberate and ceremonial, following patterns that reminded Maya of the communication signals they had received. "It's trying to communicate," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The movements are like sign language, a complex gestural communication system." The Shadow Claw continued its performance in the emptiness of space. Its movements were graceful and purposeful, creating patterns that seemed to have meaning. Maya recognized elements that could only be described as formal and ritualistic. "Captain," she said, turning to Monroe, "we need to respond. If we don't acknowledge this attempt at communication, we might lose the opportunity for peaceful contact." Commander Sullivan stepped forward. "Absolutely not. We're not revealing our capabilities to a potential threat. For all we know, this is a scouting mission for a larger attack force." Captain Monroe looked between them, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. Making first contact with an unknown species was one of the most important decisions a starship captain could make. The wrong choice could lead to war or the destruction of her station. "Rodriguez," she said carefully, "you have 30 seconds to convince me that responding to this creature is the right decision." Maya's mind raced. Everything she had studied about interspecies communication and first contact protocols was telling her the same thing. The alien's behavior was consistent with peaceful intent, but she needed to make her colleagues understand. "Captain, everything about their approach suggests intelligence and restraint. They could have attacked immediately when they arrived, but instead they're following what appears to be a formal diplomatic protocol. The ship's positioning, the graduated communication attempts, even the individual's posture, it all points to a sophisticated culture that understands the concept of peaceful contact." She paused, knowing that her next words would determine whether they made history or started a war. "They're not trying to threaten us, Captain. They're trying to honor us." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed her words. Outside, the Shadow Claw continued its ritual dance in space, waiting for a response that would determine the fate of both their species. Captain Monroe stared at the alien creature floating outside their station. The Shadow Claw continued its strange movements in space, its claws creating patterns that seemed to have meaning. The entire command center waited for her decision. "Do it," she said finally. "But Rodriguez, if this goes wrong, we all pay the price." Maya felt a mix of excitement and terror. She had studied alien communication for years, but this was her first real chance to put her theories into practice. The lives of everyone on the station might depend on her understanding of creature behavior. She moved to the communications station and began working on a response. The mathematical sequences the alien had sent were complex, but Maya had identified the basic patterns. She modified them slightly to show understanding and peaceful intent, then added her own mathematical progression to indicate intelligence. "Transmitting now," she announced. The response from the Shadow Claw was immediate and dramatic. The creature's movements changed from slow and formal to quick and excited. Its earlier rigid ceremony gave way to more animated gestures, like a person celebrating good news. "I think it worked," Maya said, watching the creature's reaction. "It's showing signs of excitement and approval." The alien ship began transmitting again, but this time the signals were much more complex. Maya's equipment detected multiple layers of information, mathematical concepts, spatial relationships, and patterns that reminded her of music and art. "Captain," she reported, "the transmissions are becoming more sophisticated. They're not just sending greetings anymore. This looks like cultural exchange, art, music, maybe even stories." Commander Sullivan was not convinced. "Rodriguez, you're making huge assumptions based on electronic signals. This could be tactical data or weapon specifications." But Maya was seeing something beautiful in the alien transmissions. The patterns had rhythm and harmony, like songs without words. The mathematical sequences created pictures in her mind, geometric shapes that moved and changed like living things. "They're sharing their culture with us," she said with wonder. "This is how they express beauty and meaning." More shadow claws began emerging from the ship. They moved to join the first creature, and together they began performing what could only be described as a dance. Their movements were synchronized and graceful, creating a three-dimensional performance in the vacuum of space. "6 more contacts approaching from the outer system," announced the sensor operator. "Same ship design as the first one." The command center erupted into controlled panic. Commander Sullivan immediately began coordinating defensive positions while other officers prepared for what looked like an incoming attack. "All stations, prepare for multiple hostile contacts," Sullivan ordered. This was obviously a scouting mission. Maya watched the sensor displays as 6 more alien ships approached their position. But something about their formation seemed familiar. They were not moving like an attack fleet. Instead, they were arranged in a pattern that reminded her of ceremonial formations she had studied in various cultures. "Captain," she said urgently, "they're not attacking. Look at their positioning. They're creating a formal arrangement around our station." The new ships arrived and took positions at precise distances from the station and from each other. Each ship stopped at exactly the same distance as the first one, creating a perfect circle around the human outpost. "Defensive pattern," Sullivan reported. "They're surrounding us." But Maya saw something different. "No, Commander, it's a ceremonial formation. They're creating a formal space for communication." More shadow claws emerged from the newly arrived ships. They moved to join the others in their space dance, adding layers of complexity to the performance. Maya realized she was watching something unprecedented, an entire alien culture expressing itself through movement and art. "Captain, the new ships are transmitting cultural data as well," she reported. "Music, visual art, mathematical poetry, they're sharing everything they consider beautiful and meaningful." The alien transmissions filled Maya's screens with patterns of incredible complexity. She saw mathematical relationships that described concepts she had never imagined. The aliens were not just communicating, they were teaching, sharing the deepest parts of their civilization. "This is amazing," she whispered. "They're not just trying to talk to us. They're trying to show us who they are." Captain Monroe watched the display of alien ships and dancing creatures. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you said they were trying to honor us. What did you mean by that?" Maya studied the formation of ships and the synchronized movements of the shadow claws. Everything about the situation reminded her of ceremonies she had read about in anthropological studies. The formal positioning, the cultural sharing, the elaborate group performance, it all pointed to one conclusion. The ship positioning, the ritual movements, the sharing of cultural treasures, it's all following what appears to be a formal protocol for acknowledging a species they consider worthy of respect. She paused, knowing how her next words would sound to the military officers around her. In predator cultures, this kind of elaborate ceremony is usually reserved for greeting other apex predators, species they recognize as equals. The command center fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant vibration of the station's engines. Everyone was processing the implications of what Maya had just said. Commander Sullivan was the first to respond. "So you're telling us that these creatures think we're as dangerous as they are?" Maya looked at the displays showing the alien ships and their dancing occupants. "Not just dangerous, Commander. Worthy of respect. In predator societies, strength alone isn't enough to earn this kind of treatment. They also value intelligence, courage, and tactical skill." "But how would they know about our capabilities?" asked Lieutenant Williams. "We've never encountered them before." Maya had been thinking about this question since the aliens first arrived. They're nomadic, traveling from system to system? They've probably been observing our military actions against other hostile species. To predators who value combat effectiveness, our success rate would be impressive. Captain Monroe was considering the implications. "You're saying they've been watching us fight other aliens and decided we're worth talking to?" "More than that," Maya replied. "They've decided we're worth honoring. This whole ceremony is their way of saying they recognize us as fellow apex predators." The alien dance continued outside the station, growing more complex as additional shadow claws joined the performance. Maya watched in fascination as the creatures created patterns that seemed to tell stories through movement. "There's something else," she said, studying the alien behavior more carefully. "The way they're performing this ceremony, it's not just formal recognition, it's also a test." "What kind of test?" Captain Monroe asked. Maya pointed to the displays showing the alien ships and dancers. "They're following their own cultural protocols, but they're also watching to see how we respond. If we react with fear or aggression, it proves we're not worthy of their respect. But if we respond with understanding and appropriate ceremony," she trailed off, realizing what she was suggesting. "Rodriguez?" Sullivan said suspiciously. "What are you thinking?" Maya took a deep breath. "They're waiting for us to participate in the ceremony, to show that we understand their culture and respect their customs. And how exactly would we do that?" Captain Monroe asked. Maya looked around the command center at the faces of her colleagues. Some seemed curious, others skeptical. All of them were waiting for her to either prove her theories or admit she was wrong. "Someone needs to go out there and meet them face to face," she said quietly. "Following their protocols, showing respect for their ceremony, demonstrating that we understand what they're trying to communicate." The room erupted in protests. Commander Sullivan stood up immediately. "Absolutely not. We're not sending anyone out there to become alien food." But Maya had made up her mind. "Captain, if I'm right about their intentions, direct contact would be the safest possible approach. If I'm wrong, ... She paused, knowing that her next words would determine whether she lived or died. "If I'm wrong, then we proceed with defensive measures, but if I'm right, we have the opportunity to make the most important alliance in human history." Captain Monroe looked at the tactical displays showing 7 alien ships surrounding their station. No weapons had been detected, no aggressive actions taken. Everything Maya had predicted about their behavior had been accurate. What exactly are you proposing, Lieutenant? Maya's heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. Let me take a shuttle and approach them directly. Following their ceremonial protocols, showing that we understand and respect their culture. The command center fell silent as everyone considered the implications of her proposal. Outside, the Shadowclaws continued their dance, waiting for humanity's response. The command center erupted in arguments. Officers raised their voices as they debated Maya's proposal to approach the alien ships directly. Commander Sullivan's face was red with anger as he pointed at the displays showing the 7 Shadowclaw vessels. This is insane, he said loudly. We're talking about sending Rodriguez straight into the jaws of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Captain Monroe held up her hand for silence. Everyone calm down. We need to think through this carefully. Maya stood in the center of the chaos, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. She had spent years studying alien behavior and everything she knew told her that direct contact was not only safe but necessary. Captain, she said, if we don't respond to their ceremony properly, we risk insulting them. In predator cultures, failing to acknowledge a formal greeting can be seen as cowardice or disrespect. And what happens if you're wrong? Asked Lieutenant Williams. What if this is all just an elaborate hunting strategy? Maya looked at the displays showing the alien ships and their dancing occupants. The creatures had been performing their ceremony for over an hour now, maintaining perfect formation and continuing their cultural transmissions. No hunting behavior she had ever studied involved this level of patience and ritual. Then I'll be the first to know, she replied simply. Commander Sullivan stepped forward. Captain, I cannot recommend this course of action. We have no idea what these creatures are capable of. Sending Rodriguez out there is the same as killing her. But Maya was studying the alien transmissions more carefully. The mathematical patterns were becoming clearer, and she was beginning to understand the deeper meaning behind their ceremony. Commander, she said, they're not just performing a greeting ritual, they're telling us their history. She pointed to the screens showing the complex patterns of the alien transmissions. These mathematical sequences describe battles, victories, and defeats. They're sharing their military records with us. Captain Monroe moved to examine the displays. Military records? Maya nodded excitedly. Look at these patterns. They describe tactical situations, enemy formations, and combat outcomes. They're showing us that they understand warfare and respect our abilities as fighters. The alien transmissions continued to flow across Maya's screens. She saw mathematical descriptions of space battles, planetary campaigns, and strategic victories. The Shadowclaws were not just greeting humanity, they were acknowledging human military achievements. They know about our war with the Krek Empire, Maya said with growing amazement. These patterns describe the battle at Centauri Station. They watched us fight and were impressed by our tactics. Commander Sullivan looked skeptical. How could they possibly know about classified military operations? Because they're nomadic, Maya explained. They travel from system to system, observing other species. They've been watching human expansion for years, studying our military campaigns. The implications were staggering. The Shadowclaws had been secretly observing humanity's rise as a military power. They had watched human forces defeat hostile alien species and had decided that humanity deserved respect. Captain, Maya said urgently, this changes everything. They're not threatening us. They're trying to recruit us. Recruit us for what? Captain Monroe asked. Maya studied the alien transmissions more carefully. The patterns were showing her something she had not expected, descriptions of other species, other battles, other alliances. They're building a coalition, she said with growing excitement. A group of apex predator species that work together. They want humanity to join. The command center fell silent as everyone processed this information. The idea that the most feared predators in the galaxy wanted to form an alliance with humanity was almost too incredible to believe. Rodriguez? Commander Sullivan said slowly. Are you saying these creatures want to be our allies? Maya nodded. More than that, they want to be our partners. In predator societies, this kind of formal recognition is an invitation to join the pack. She pointed to the displays showing the alien ships arranged in perfect formation around the station. The way they're positioned, the ceremony they're performing, the cultural information they're sharing, it's all part of a formal invitation process. Captain Monroe was beginning to understand, and if we refuse or fail to respond properly, then we're seen as weak or cowardly, Maya replied. They'll leave and probably never contact us again. Worse, they might warn other predator species that humans are not worthy of respect. The weight of the situation was becoming clear to everyone in the command center. This was not just first contact with an alien species, it was humanity's chance to join an alliance of the galaxy's most powerful predators. What do they want us to do? Captain Monroe asked. Maya looked at the screens showing the dancing shadow claws. Their movements were becoming more elaborate, but she could see a pattern of expectation in their behavior. They were waiting for something. They want us to send a representative to meet them directly, she said. Someone who can demonstrate that we understand their culture and respect their customs. Commander Sullivan shook his head. Even if you're right about their intentions, we can't risk sending someone out there. What if something goes wrong? Maya understood his concern, but she also knew that this opportunity might never come again. The Shadow Claws were offering humanity a chance to join the galaxy's most exclusive alliance, but only if they proved worthy. Commander, she said, what? If something goes right? She moved to the communication station and began working on a response to the alien transmissions. The mathematical sequences were complex, but she had identified the key patterns that indicated understanding and respect. I can create a response that shows we understand their culture and appreciate their invitation, she said. But it has to be delivered in person following their ceremonial protocols. Captain Monroe studied the tactical displays. 7 alien ships, each one potentially more powerful than their entire station. But for over an hour they had shown nothing but patience and respect. How would this work? She asked. Maya had been thinking about this since the ceremony began. I take a small diplomatic shuttle and approach the lead ship. I follow their communication protocols, demonstrate understanding of their culture, and show that humanity is worthy of their respect. And if they decide we're not worthy? Lieutenant Williams asked. Maya met his gaze steadily. Then at least we'll know we tried to make the most important alliance in human history. The alien transmission suddenly changed tone. The mathematical patterns became more urgent, and the dancing shadow claws began moving more quickly. Maya realized they were running out of time. Captain, she said urgently, they're getting impatient. If we don't respond soon, they'll assume we're not interested. Commander Sullivan stood up. I still think this is too dangerous. We should call for military reinforcements and handle this situation with proper backup. But Maya knew that involving the military would ruin any chance of peaceful contact. The Shadow Claws had come here to meet humans as equals, not to face another military confrontation. Commander, if we respond with military force, we prove that we don't understand their culture. We'll lose this opportunity forever. Captain Monroe looked around the command center at her officers. Some seemed supportive of Maya's plan, others remained skeptical. The decision was hers to make, and it would affect not just their station, but possibly all of humanity. Rodriguez, she said finally, you have 15 minutes to prepare a shuttle and your communication protocols. If you're going to do this, we need to do it right. Maya felt a surge of gratitude and terror. She was about to attempt the most important diplomatic mission in human history, and she had only 15 minutes to prepare. Thank you, Captain, she said. I won't let you down. As she rushed to prepare for her mission, Maya could see the alien ships maintaining their perfect formation outside the station. The Shadow Claws continued their ceremonial dance, waiting patiently for humanity's response. Everything Maya had studied and believed about alien behavior was about to be put to the ultimate test. In a few minutes, she would either make history or become the first human to die in direct contact with the galaxy's most feared predators. But she believed in her research, and she believed in the possibility of understanding between species. As she prepared her shuttle for launch, Maya knew that this was what she had been training for her entire career. Maya sat in the pilot seat of the small diplomatic shuttle, her hands shaking as she ran through the pre-flight checklist. Through the viewport, she could see the 7 alien ships arranged in their perfect circle around the station. The Shadow Claws continued their ceremonial dance in the empty space between the vessels. "Final systems check complete," she reported to the command center. "All equipment functioning normally." Captain Monroe's voice came through the communication system. "Rodriguez, you still have time to change your mind. No one will think less of you if you decide this is too dangerous." Maya took a deep breath and looked at the displays showing her communication protocols. She had programmed the shuttle systems to broadcast the mathematical sequences that should indicate peaceful intent and cultural understanding. Everything she had learned about alien behavior told her this was the right approach. "I'm ready, Captain," she said. "Requesting permission to launch?" "Permission granted," Captain Monroe replied. "And Rodriguez? Good luck." The shuttle bay doors opened, and Maya piloted her small craft out into space. The alien ships looked even more impressive up close, their dark hulls seeming to absorb the light from nearby stars. As she approached the formation, Maya began broadcasting her prepared greeting sequences. The response was immediate. The dancing shadow claws turned toward her shuttle and began moving in a new pattern. Instead of the circular movements they had been performing, they now created a corridor of dancers that led directly toward the largest alien ship. "Command, the aliens are responding to my approach," Maya reported. "They're guiding me toward what appears to be their lead vessel." Commander Sullivan's voice came through the communication system. "Rodriguez, if you see any sign of weapons or aggressive behavior, abort immediately and return to the station." Maya followed the guidance of the dancing aliens, her shuttle moving slowly through the corridor they had created. The shadow claws moved with incredible grace, their movements both beautiful and terrifying. Up close, Maya could see that their scales seemed to change color in response to their emotions or the light around them. "They're even more impressive than the report suggested," she said into her communication system. "But their behavior is completely peaceful. They're treating this like a formal ceremony." The largest alien ship began to change as Maya approached. Just like the first vessel, a section of its hull started to iris open, revealing a docking bay, large enough for her shuttle. Maya felt her heart racing as she realized she was about to enter an alien spacecraft. "Command, the lead ship is opening what appears to be a docking bay," she reported. "I'm going to enter and attempt direct contact." "Rodriguez, are you sure about this?" Captain Monroe asked. "Once you're inside their ship, we won't be able to help you if something goes wrong." Maya looked at the opening in the alien hull. She could see soft lights inside, and the bay seemed to be filling with atmosphere. Everything about the situation suggested that the aliens were preparing to welcome her aboard their ship. "I'm sure, Captain," she said. "This is what we came here to do." Maya piloted her shuttle into the alien docking bay. The organic doors sealed behind her as atmosphere flooded the chamber. Through her viewport, she watched as several shadow claws approached on foot. They moved with careful, deliberate steps, their claws clicking against the deck plating up close. The aliens were even more imposing than Maya had imagined. They stood 8 feet tall, their scaled bodies rippling with muscle. Their claws were easily capable of tearing through metal, and their eyes glowed with an intelligence that was both alien and familiar, but their posture was not aggressive. Maya recognized the body language from her studies, the way they held their claws, the angle of their heads, the careful distance they maintained. These were the movements of creatures showing respect, not preparing for attack. The largest shadow claw stepped forward. Maya could see intricate patterns carved into its scales, suggesting high rank or special status. The creature looked directly at her shuttle, and Maya felt as if it was looking directly at her through the VIEWPO. Then the alien did something that Maya would remember for the rest of her life. The creature placed one clawed hand over what appeared to be its heart. With its other hand, it gestured toward Maya's shuttle in a movement that could only be described as a salute. Then, slowly and deliberately, it lowered its head in a bow that showed deep respect. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She was witnessing something unprecedented, an apex predator showing formal respect to a human being, one by one. The other shadow claws followed the leader's example. Each creature placed a hand over its heart, gestured toward Maya's shuttle, and bowed its head. The entire group was performing a military salute that transcended species boundaries. "Command," Maya said, her voice filled with wonder. "They're saluting me." The entire group is performing what appears to be a formal military salute. Back on the station, the command center was silent as everyone watched the feeds from Maya's shuttle. Commander Sullivan stared at the displays in amazement. The creatures he had expected to be savage killers were showing Maya the kind of respect usually reserved for honored war heroes. "Are they actually saluting her?" he asked in disbelief. Captain Monroe nodded slowly. "More than that. In military traditions across dozens of species, that kind of formal acknowledgement is reserved for warriors who have proven themselves in battle." Maya activated her shuttle's external speakers and began broadcasting the most complex mathematical sequence she had developed. This one incorporated elements of respect, gratitude, and peaceful greeting, all woven together in patterns that should be recognizable to any intelligent species. The aliens' response was immediate and overwhelming. They began what could only be called a war chant, but instead of being threatening, it felt like a celebration. The sound echoed through the docking bay, a harmonious blend of voices that seemed to express joy and welcome. The lead shadow claw approached Maya's shuttle and pressed its palm against the hull, just inches from where Maya's hand rested on the inside. The gesture was universal, a sign of connection and understanding that needed no translation. Maya pressed her own palm against the inside of the viewport, matching the alien's gesture. Through the metal and glass, she could feel the warmth of the creature's hand. For a moment, human and alien were connected across the vast gulf of space and evolution. "Command," Maya reported, her voice filled with emotion. "I believe we have successfully established peaceful first contact with the Shadowclaw species." The celebration that followed would be remembered throughout human history. The aliens had not come to conquer or destroy. They had come to welcome humanity into the most exclusive alliance in the galaxy. Maya's courage in approaching them directly had proven that humans possessed not just military strength, but the wisdom to understand and respect other cultures. As news of the successful first contact spread throughout human space, Maya found herself transformed from an outcast to a hero. The woman who had been mocked for studying alien behavior instead of fighting them had just secured humanity's most powerful alliance. Commander Sullivan, watching the celebration from the command center, found himself having to reconsider everything he thought he knew about strength and leadership. The young officer he had dismissed as weak had just accomplished something that no amount of military force could have achieved. "Captain," he said quietly, "I owe Rodriguez an apology. And humanity owes her a debt we can never repay." "Captain." Monroe smiled as she watched Maya's shuttle begin its return journey, escorted by an honor guard of Shadowclaw vessels. "Sometimes the greatest victories come not from the barrel of a gun, but from the courage to extend an open hand." Maya Rodriguez had proven that understanding was more powerful than weapons, that respect was stronger than fear, and that sometimes the most important battles were won not by fighting, but by having the courage to trust in the possibility of peace. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as partners in the greatest alliance ever formed. And it had all started with one young woman who refused to give up on the idea that different species could understand each other. Maya's shuttle docked safely at the station, and she stepped out to find her colleagues waiting to welcome her home. The woman who had left as an outcast had returned as the architect of a new age in human history.